I'm 26F, and this story starts when I was 18, just a few months into college. I grew up in a strict, religious household. My parents had rules for everything: curfews, clothing, even the books I could read. They said it was for my own good, to keep me on the right path. Back then, I thought it was normal. I thought they cared. But looking back, their version of love was more about control than care. So when I found out I was pregnant during my freshman year, I panicked. My boyfriend and I were only a few months into our relationship, and the last thing I expected was to get pregnant. I couldn't even think about how to tell him at first because the bigger problem was my parents. Telling them felt like walking into a storm without an umbrella. When I finally did, their reaction wasn't anger, at least not outwardly. It was worse: disappointment, laced with that suffocating sense of guilt they always used to keep me in line. They told me no one else could know, not even my friends. According to them, the family's reputation would be ruined if word got out. They assured me they'd help me through it, though, as long as I followed their plan. They promised everything would be okay. Their plan? Have the baby in secret, let them take care of her while I finished school, and then, when I was ready, I could step back into the role of being her mother. It sounded like a lifeline at the time, so I clung to it. I stopped seeing my friends, dropped out of my campus clubs, and stayed home under the guise of being sick. I didn't realize it at the time, but they were isolating me, cutting off any potential support outside of them. When I went into labor, my parents didn't let me choose the hospital. They picked one in a neighboring town where no one would recognize us. My mom was in the delivery room with me, not because I wanted her there, but because she insisted. She held my hand but controlled everything else, from what I could eat afterward to who was allowed to see the baby. I gave birth to a baby girl. She was perfect, tiny fingers, soft dark hair, and the loudest little cry you can imagine. But I barely got to hold her before they whisked her away. My parents said they were helping, making sure she was taken care of while I rested. At the time, I was too exhausted to fight back, but even then, something didn't feel right. The next few weeks were a blur. I wasn't allowed to feed her or make decisions about her care. My mom started referring to herself as Grandma Mom, joking about how she'd be filling in while I focused on getting my life back on track. At first, I brushed it off, but the way she said it, almost like she believed it, made my stomach twist. Then came the paperwork. My dad handed me a stack of forms, explaining they were for the baby's birth certificate and hospital records. I didn't read them carefully, I trusted them. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. I signed everything where they told me to and handed it back without a second thought. One morning, about 3 weeks after I brought her home, I woke up to an empty crib. At first, I thought my mom had taken her for a morning feeding. But when I came downstairs, my parents were dressed like they were heading out for the day. They told me they were taking her to a friend's house so I could rest. I don't know why, but I didn't push back. Maybe I was still in that fog of exhaustion and trust. But hours turned into days, and my daughter didn't come home. When I finally demanded answers, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table like they were breaking bad news to a child. They said they had done what was best for everyone. They had arranged for her to be adopted by a family from our church, a couple who couldn't have children of their own. They said I was too young, too unstable, and that my baby deserved better than what I could give her. I screamed, I begged, I threatened to call the police. That's when they showed me the paperwork I'd signed, the one that supposedly gave up my parental rights. My dad said, "You agreed to this. You just didn't realize it at the time." For weeks, I fought them. I even tried reaching out to the church, but no one would tell me where the adoptive family lived. It felt like every door was shut, every road blocked. By the time I turned 19, I realized I wasn't getting her back. I finished college as fast as I could, moved out, and cut off contact with my parents. The grief never really went away, but I tried to build a life for myself. I moved to another state, met my husband, and now I have 2 kids, a 3-year-old boy and a 1-year-old girl. My husband knows what happened, but it's not something I like to talk about. Then, out of nowhere, my parents reached out. A letter in the mail, addressed to me like nothing had happened. They want to meet their grandkids. They're acting like we just drifted apart, like there's no reason for the giant canyon between us. My relatives are pressuring me to forgive them, saying they're old now, and they regret what they did. But how do you forgive something like that? Update 1. After their letter arrived, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I looked at my kids, I felt a knot in my stomach. My husband saw how distracted I was and suggested I meet with them. Not to forgive them, but to get answers. We decided a neutral location was safest, so I reached out and told them to meet me at a small cafe about halfway between us. I arrived first. The place was quiet, the kind of spot where no one would overhear a personal conversation. My parents walked in together, looking almost normal, like the kind of grandparents you'd see in a park feeding ducks. My mom smiled cautiously, but my dad's face was unreadable. They sat down, and after some awkward silence, my mom started talking. She said they had only done what they thought was best. They brought up my age at the time, how I was barely an adult and not ready to raise a child. My dad chimed in, reminding me that I hadn't even been able to afford diapers without their help. I didn't let them finish. I reminded them of their promises. They had told me they'd help me, that we'd figure it out together. I said they manipulated me into signing papers I didn't understand. They tried to brush it off, saying I must have misunderstood, but I could see the cracks in their composure. My dad's voice got sharper, and my mom's hands started trembling. Then the gaslighting began. They said I'd agreed to the adoption, that I'd been unstable and overwhelmed. My dad leaned forward, insisting that I'd even thanked them at the time for taking charge. That was the moment I lost it. I told them they had stolen my baby, lied to me, and destroyed any chance I had to be her mother. My mom broke down first, tears streaming down her face as she kept repeating that they were only trying to protect me. My dad stayed cold, defending their actions as though they were beyond reproach. But then my mom slipped. She mentioned the adoptive family, how they had stayed in contact all these years, sending updates and photos. Hearing that was like being punched in the gut. All this time, they knew where my daughter was. They had pictures of her, milestones I never got to witness, and they never told me. I demanded to see the photos. My dad immediately shut it down, saying it would reopen old wounds and wasn't healthy for me. My mom looked like she wanted to argue but stayed silent, glancing nervously at him. That was the final straw. I told them they'd never meet my kids unless they showed genuine remorse and told me everything, the whole truth about what they did and why. My dad scoffed, calling me dramatic, but my mom reached for my hand, saying she wanted to make things right. I pulled away, told them I was done, and left. The fallout started almost immediately. Relatives began calling and texting, accusing me of being ungrateful and cruel. My aunt said my parents were heartbroken and that I should be ashamed of myself for keeping their grandchildren away. One cousin even suggested that I was holding onto a grudge just to punish them. My husband was furious when he heard about the backlash. He told me we didn't owe my parents anything and that he was ready to block them completely. I was tempted, but part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. That night, I started looking into legal options, wondering if there was any way to reopen the adoption or at least find out more about my daughter. While researching, I stumbled onto an online support group for women who had gone through similar betrayals. Their stories were hauntingly familiar, parents who had pressured them into giving up their babies, only to regret it years later. Some had found ways to reconnect with their children, and their advice gave me a glimmer of hope. The next few weeks were a roller coaster. My parents doubled down, sending letters and gifts for my kids, trying to bypass my boundaries. My son's daycare even called one day, saying a package had arrived for him from Grandma and Grandpa. I told them to return it, but the incident rattled me. In the middle of all this, my mom called. Her voice was shaky, and she was crying before she even finished saying hello. She said she wanted to fix things and that she was willing to meet again, just the two of us. She sounded different this time, less defensive, more desperate. I hesitated but eventually agreed, setting up another meeting at the same cafe. My husband wasn't thrilled, but he understood why I felt like I needed to go. He reminded me to stay cautious, not to let her guilt trip me. As much as I wanted to believe my mom's tears were genuine, I couldn't forget the years of lies and manipulation. I don't know what she'll say this time, but I'm going in prepared. If there's even a chance she's willing to tell the truth, I need to hear it. For my daughter, for my family, and for myself. Update 2. I showed up at the cafe for the second meeting with my mom, bracing myself for whatever she had to say. To my surprise, my dad came along too, carrying a worn leather folder. My mom looked more nervous than the last time, while my dad seemed colder, like he was preparing for a business negotiation. They sat down across from me, and my dad opened the folder, spreading out several documents and a few photos on the table. He said they wanted to clear the air and show me the whole picture. My mom stayed quiet, her hands fidgeting in her lap. The documents were a mix of legal forms and letters. One stood out immediately, a financial record showing a donation made to my parents' church from the adoptive family. The amount wasn't small. My dad tried to brush it off, saying it was just a gift to the church and not directly related to the adoption. But as I kept looking through the papers, it became clear the money had been part of the arrangement. Then came the photos. They weren't of my daughter, but of the adoptive family, a smiling couple standing in front of a large house, holding hands. My mom pointed at them and said they were good people, well off, and able to give my daughter the life I never could. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about their belief that I was too young or unfit. They had orchestrated the adoption, knowing the financial gain it would bring to their church. I looked at my dad and asked if he'd sold my baby. He stiffened, saying I was twisting the truth. My mom's face crumpled, and she started crying, saying she had regrets but was too scared to stop what was happening at the time. I couldn't hold back anymore. I told them what they did wasn't just manipulation, it was exploitation. My dad didn't flinch. He said they did what was necessary to protect me and the baby. He claimed the donation was unrelated, but the timing and the way it was documented told a different story. My mom's sobs grew louder, and she admitted she had wanted to tell me everything years ago, but was afraid my dad would cut her off too. I didn't stay long after that. I told them I didn't want to hear from them again unless they were willing to fully admit what they did and show real remorse. My dad didn't respond, and my mom just nodded through her tears. I grabbed my bag and left. That night I couldn't sleep. My husband sat with me as I went through the documents again, trying to piece together anything that could lead me to my daughter. One letter mentioned the name of the adoption agency, and with a bit of digging online, I found a list of families they'd worked with in the past. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I decided to send an email to the adoptive family. It took hours to write, carefully choosing each word so I didn't come across as threatening or invasive. I explained my side of the story, how I was coerced and lied to, and how I only wanted to know if my daughter was happy and safe. I hit send and immediately felt a wave of anxiety. The waiting began. Days passed without a response. I checked my inbox constantly, refreshing it every few minutes. My husband reminded me to stay patient, but it was hard to focus on anything else. Then, one evening, an email finally came through. The adoptive parents wrote back cautiously. They said they'd had no idea the adoption wasn't fully consensual and were deeply sorry for the pain I'd experienced. They confirmed my daughter was happy and healthy, but they were hesitant to share too much, wanting to protect her stability. They offered to send a recent photo and keep me updated on her life, but they made it clear they weren't ready to facilitate direct contact yet. I opened the photo attachment, and my heart stopped. She was 8 now, her dark hair pulled into a ponytail, and her smile was so bright it lit up the picture. She looked so much like me when I was her age. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, trying to memorize every detail of her face. In their email, the adoptive parents explained their perspective. They believed the adoption was fully agreed upon at the time and had no idea about the manipulation behind it. They said they wanted to ensure my daughter's life remained stable and would consider introducing us when she was older, if she expressed interest. I wrote back, thanking them for the photo and their willingness to share updates. I reassured them I had no intention of disrupting my daughter's life and only wanted the chance to know her someday. Their response felt genuine, and while it wasn't everything I wanted, it was a step forward. For the first time in years, I felt a sliver of hope. Even though my parents had betrayed me, I was beginning to rebuild the connection they tried to erase. My daughter was out there, happy and loved, and now I had a small window into her world. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Update 3. Not long after I received the email and photo from my daughter's adoptive parents, things took an ugly turn. Somehow, my parents found out about my contact with the adoptive family. At first, it was subtle, passive-aggressive comments sent through relatives and vague messages implying I was stirring up trouble, but it quickly escalated. My aunt called me one evening to tell me my parents had been going around their church, telling people that I was unstable and had been harassing them. They painted a picture of a bitter, ungrateful daughter who was trying to ruin their lives out of spite. My dad claimed they had been nothing but supportive and that I was twisting the truth to make them look bad. The worst part? Some of my relatives believed them. Soon after, my husband got a call from his brother, who mentioned that our parents were trying to get our address. Apparently, they told him they just wanted to deliver gifts for our kids. Thankfully, my brother-in-law knew better and didn't give them any information. But it didn't stop there. The daycare called me a few days later. Someone claiming to be the kids' grandparents had tried to show up, asking to see them. The staff, already aware of the situation, refused to let them in and immediately contacted me. Hearing this made my blood run cold. I realized they were no longer just trying to manipulate me, they were actively targeting my kids. That night, I told my husband we needed to take legal action. We contacted a lawyer to discuss filing a restraining order. As we gathered the evidence, emails, voicemails, and statements from family members, I also started reaching out to relatives to confront them. The ones who had taken my parents' side were defensive, accusing me of overreacting. They claimed my parents were just trying to make amends and that I was being too harsh. But not everyone sided with them. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years reached out privately, saying they'd always suspected something wasn't right about my parents. They shared stories from their childhood, moments where they had seen my parents' controlling behavior but hadn't felt they could speak up. Their support was unexpected but reassuring, especially when the family seemed so divided. Filing the restraining order was a lengthy process, but it was worth it. My lawyer helped me submit the paperwork, and we included the incident at the daycare as part of the evidence. While waiting for the court's response, I had to sit down with the daycare staff again to implement tighter security measures. We added a password system for pickups and made sure the staff knew exactly who was authorized to be near my kids. The stress started to take a toll. I couldn't sleep, and even the smallest noises around the house would make me jump. But in the middle of all this, the adoptive family sent me another update. They mentioned that my daughter had started asking questions about her birth family. It was mostly curiosity. She wanted to know if she looked like me, if I liked the same things she did. The adoptive parents seemed more open to future conversations and even suggested we could have another photo exchange soon. Hearing that gave me a much-needed boost of hope. While my parents were spiraling, the bond with my daughter, however small, was beginning to grow. I shared this news with my husband, who reminded me to focus on what mattered most, protecting our kids and slowly building that connection with my firstborn. But my parents weren't done. One afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. When I checked the peephole, there they were, standing on my porch with a box of what looked like toys. My stomach dropped. I didn't answer the door but instead called the police. By the time the officers arrived, my parents were still there, arguing with my husband, who had gone outside to tell them to leave. The police took statements from us and warned my parents to stay away, reminding them about the restraining order. After that, things calmed down, at least on the surface. My parents stopped trying to contact me directly, but the smear campaign continued. I had to block several relatives on social media, and even considered changing my phone number. Despite everything, my support system grew stronger. Friends, a few understanding family members, and even neighbors rallied around us, offering help and reassurance. Through all of this, my resolve only hardened. I wasn't going to let my parents intimidate me or manipulate their way back into my life. They had already taken so much from me, but I wasn't going to let them take my peace or my children's safety. The adoptive parents' updates became a lifeline. Knowing that my daughter was curious about me and that they were open to keeping the connection alive gave me a sense of purpose. It reminded me that there was something worth fighting for. No matter how hard things got, I was determined to move forward, one step at a time. Update 4. A few weeks after my last exchange with the adoptive parents, I received an email from them. They had taken time to think things through and wanted to arrange a video call between me and my daughter. They suggested framing the call as a casual conversation with a family friend to avoid overwhelming her. They wanted to test the waters before introducing me as her biological mother. Reading the email left me both excited and terrified. The call was set for a Saturday afternoon. In the days leading up to it, I spent hours preparing, going over what to say, practicing how to keep the conversation light and natural. My husband reassured me that just being myself would be enough, but I couldn't shake the fear of saying the wrong thing. When the time came, I logged into the video call. My heart raced as the screen connected, and there she was, my daughter. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and she was sitting on the edge of her seat, glancing shyly at the screen. The adoptive parent sat beside her, smiling warmly and encouraging her to say hello. The call started slow, with simple questions about her favorite hobbies and school. She was shy but polite, answering in short sentences. I made sure to keep the tone light, mentioning how I liked the same books she did and asking about her favorite games. Slowly, she began to open up, showing me a drawing she'd made earlier that day. The entire call lasted about 15 minutes. It felt both incredibly short and like the longest, most emotional conversation I'd ever had. When it was time to say goodbye, her adoptive parents thanked me for respecting their boundaries and promised to stay in touch. As the screen went dark, I sat there, overwhelmed by the mix of hope and sadness. It was a step forward, but I couldn't help wishing for more time. Later that evening, my son, who's 3, overheard me talking to my husband about the call. He asked me who I'd been talking to, and when I hesitated, he followed up with, "Was that my other sister?" His curiosity caught me off guard. I realized it was time to explain things in a way he could understand. I told him that he did have another sister, but she lived with another family. He seemed satisfied with my simple explanation and went back to playing with his toys. The video call strengthened my resolve. Seeing my daughter, even through a screen, made me more determined to maintain contact and build a relationship over time. But my parents' retaliation came quickly. They somehow found out about the call, and the threats started pouring in. I began receiving emails and voicemails accusing me of destroying the family and spreading lies. They made it clear they weren't going to let this go quietly. I forwarded the messages to my lawyer, who formally notified my parents of the restraining order's terms. I wasn't taking any chances. My cousin, the one who had supported me earlier, stepped in again, sharing screenshots of group texts from our extended family. In those messages, my parents painted me as a vindictive daughter who was cutting them off for no reason. The cousin called them out, revealing the truth about their manipulative behavior. The church community where my parents were well known got involved, too. I started receiving hateful messages from people I didn't even know, accusing me of being cruel and ungrateful. It was frustrating and exhausting, but I focused on the people who believed me. My husband, close friends, and a few supportive relatives kept reminding me that I didn't owe my parents anything. In the midst of all this, the adoptive parents reached out again. They reassured me that my parents hadn't contacted them or tried to interfere with my daughter. That was a relief, though I couldn't help worrying about what my parents might try next. During the same conversation, the adoptive parents cautiously mentioned the possibility of an in-person meeting in a few years if my daughter expressed interest. They made it clear they wanted to take things slow, but the fact that they were even open to the idea felt like a victory. Despite the chaos with my parents, I found myself feeling hopeful about the future. The connection with my daughter was small but growing, and the adoptive parents seemed genuinely committed to keeping that door open. It was far from a perfect situation, but it was a start. I could see a path forward, one where my daughter might one day know the truth about what happened and understand that I never stopped thinking about her. For now, I'm focusing on protecting my family and taking things one step at a time. The road ahead won't be easy, but I'm ready to face it. Update 5. I thought things had settled after the last incident, but my parents weren't done. One morning, I got a call from the daycare director. My parents had shown up, claiming to be my kids' grandparents and demanding to see them. The staff, already aware of the restraining order, refused to let them in and called me immediately. Hearing this made my blood run cold. They'd crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I contacted the police right away to file another report. This time, I included all the previous incidents, their unannounced visits, harassing messages, and now this. My lawyer advised me to strengthen the case by filing for a more permanent protective order. Meanwhile, I worked with the daycare to implement stricter safety measures, including a password system for pickups. Every authorized person on the list was given a unique code, and the staff was instructed to double-check IDs for anyone unfamiliar. The fallout within the family was immediate. More relatives came out of the woodwork, accusing me of overreacting and driving a wedge between my parents and their beloved grandchildren. The guilt-tripping reached new levels. One relative claimed my parents were heartbroken and that I was being unnecessarily cruel by not letting them have a relationship with my kids. But not everyone took their side. An older aunt I hadn't spoken to in years called me out of the blue. She admitted she'd always suspected my parents were controlling and manipulative, even when I was a child. She apologized for not stepping in sooner, saying she didn't feel it was her place at the time. Her support was unexpected but welcome, especially during a time when most of the family seemed determined to paint me as the villain. In the middle of this chaos, the adoptive parents reached out again. They let me know that my daughter had been asking more questions about her birth family. She wanted to know what I looked like, what kind of music I liked, and whether we had anything in common. Hearing that warmed my heart. The adoptive parents suggested we start with another video call to see how she felt before discussing the possibility of an in-person meeting. I agreed immediately. The second call went even better than the first. My daughter was more relaxed this time, smiling more and even laughing at a joke I made about a favorite cartoon we both loved. She showed me her favorite stuffed animal and talked about a school project she was excited about. The call was short, but every minute felt like a gift. Afterward, the adoptive parents thanked me for being patient and understanding, saying they could see how much I cared. Meanwhile, my parents were planning their next move. A letter arrived at my lawyer's office, threatening legal action to gain visitation rights to my kids. They claimed I was denying them access to their grandchildren without cause. My lawyer quickly shut it down. In my state, grandparents don't have automatic visitation rights, especially not when a restraining order is in place. Their case was baseless, but the attempt only reinforced how far they were willing to go to regain control. That was the last straw. I decided to write a letter to my parents, not to reconcile, but to close the door on this chapter of my life once and for all. I detailed everything they had done, from manipulating me into signing away my parental rights to the harassment and lies that followed. I told them how much pain they'd caused and made it clear they would never be part of my life or my children's lives again. I didn't hold back, but I also didn't leave room for further argument. It was final. After sending the letter, I focused on moving forward. I started looking into age-appropriate therapy resources for my kids, wanting to ensure they had the tools to process any confusion or conflict in the future. I didn't want to burden them with the full story, but I also wanted them to feel safe and supported. The adoptive parents kept their promise to stay in touch. They shared another photo of my daughter, this time from a recent family outing. She looked so happy and carefree. They also mentioned that she'd been talking more about the idea of meeting me in person someday. It wasn't a guarantee, but the possibility filled me with hope. Blocking my parents entirely was the hardest yet most necessary step. I changed my phone number, locked down my social media, and instructed the daycare to treat any contact from them as a direct violation of the restraining order. The peace that followed was bittersweet. There was heartbreak in realizing the people who were supposed to protect me had caused so much harm, but there was also relief in finally cutting ties. Now my focus is on my family, the one I've built with my husband and the growing bond with my firstborn. While the journey has been painful, it's also been a reminder of how strong I've become. I may not have been able to protect my daughter back then, but I'm doing everything I can to make up for it now, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like the future is something to look forward to.